Hi everyone, it's Father Paolo here. Welcome to my first video for our first week of celebrating the season of creation here at St. Austin's. If you go to our website, www.staustin.org/creation, you'll find a handy guide that I put together to accompany this video. Within it, you'll find an outline of what I'm going to talk about, as well as the scripture passages that I'm going to cite, and you can read the scripture passages in full, as well as some questions for reflections and some further reading if you want to dive more deeply into the church teaching on this topic. We began our season of creation focusing on the Exodus event. The Exodus was the most important event in the history of the Jewish people. It was the event where they were liberated from being oppressed slaves in Egypt into inheriting the promised land, into inheriting a freedom to live in as a community with freedom to worship God. And the Exodus, we often think of the mighty deeds that Moses performed to overcome powerful Pharaoh, but so much of what the scriptures in the Old Testament speak of is that period in the desert, that period of wandering. And that period was very important for the formation of the community and for seeing how the community could properly live together, and also how the community could prosper, how they could be prepared to inherit that special land that they were going to receive. Now, we're all familiar with the Ten Commandments, and it's quite interesting if you read the third commandment that speaks of keeping holy the Sabbath, keeping holy the Lord's day. It doesn't really speak much about going to church. I know that that's the way that we as Catholic Christians keep holy the Sabbath, that's an essential and important way to gather when it's possible, that is, to gather as a people. I understand these are quite extraordinary times and not everyone can gather safely. But if you actually read what the commandment speaks of, it speaks of the necessity of rest. And not just rest of the individual himself or herself, but rather how the community together can collectively practice this sense of rest. I was talking to a Methodist minister friend of mine about how he does young adult programming and what are some spiritual themes. And he said the idea of practicing the Sabbath resonates so much with young people today and people of all generations, but especially young people, because there's this sense that we always have to work. We always have our email at our fingertips. There's always more to be done. And so it's hard to really distinguish and to set apart one day that's special for God. Yet the scriptures show us that it's important because that reminds us of God's creative work. Because the Lord rested on the seventh day in the book of Genesis after the creation of the world, that shows us that as we move and as we work and as we participate in God's creative act, there does come a moment where we do need to take a day of rest. And the scriptures remind us that should happen every week. And in that moment, it's a sense to appreciate the goodness of God's creation. It's also a sense to appreciate the completeness of what we have. And that is a good antidote to our constant striving, our constant desiring of more good things. It's a sense of that God, what God has given us is good enough. And I think that spirituality of rest is very important as we look to how we can better care for creation. It's that sense of recognizing that what we have is enough. Secondly, if you look in the book of Leviticus, it speaks of the practice of a sabbatical year. So it says that every seventh year, those who cultivate the land or the vineyards are to leave them alone. They're not to sow special seed. They're not to work the land as they would. They're just to let the land return to its natural state. And that, as we know in modern days, that's very important for crop rotation, to give the land a sense of rest. But that also speaks of again, this invitation to look at what we have as enough. This invitation to take some time apart from our constant striving, our constant labors, and just rest in the goodness of creation. And as with the commandment to keep holy the Sabbath, it also has a community dimension to it. It's a sense that the entire community needs to participate, and that whatever fruit the land naturally yields, whatever growth naturally happens without the labor of the farmers, that's meant to be shared by everyone. That's meant to be shared by all the laborers. That's meant to be shared by even wild animals. So there's this sense that the goodness of creation is for the natural world. And so as I look at the challenges of this time, it kind of seems like we're living through our own sabbatical year in a sense with the great pause that we have with this pandemic. Unfortunately, our productivity has plummeted. We're not able to move around as much. We're not able to have as much commerce as we normally would. And while this has created an immense challenge for so many people, if you look at it through this biblical lens of sabbatical year, there's this sense that maybe this year could be a time for us to pause and take stock of those most in need, to change our consumption habits, to think about how we can better direct our resources to those who are going without during this very challenging time. And we also have read about how this great economic pause has given the natural world a sense to recover. There's more wildlife that can be found. There's less air pollution that's being measured. It's giving nature a certain chance to heal from our relentless work that was happening in the past. Now, that being said, we can't do this forever. So as we look forward to hopefully restarting our economy in full force, I hope that we can look at what are some of the lessons of this time of sabbatical, of this time of pause. How can we create a more just social order going forward? What are the things that we consume that we need most? What are the things that we consume that maybe we don't need, that maybe we can go without? And so I hope that holding together these concepts of rest on a weekly basis and also these periodic rests that we have, that we can find more inspiration to appreciate God in nature, to appreciate God in our own lives when we're not so busy, and also to appreciate how we can care for those who are left out, those who are excluded, those who are most in need. I hope you'll join us for one of our upcoming discussions. Again, go to the website, staustin.org/creation. There you can register for our Zoom discussions to discuss some of the fruits of this. And I also hope that you'll take some time to read what the Holy Father has written about these topics and some other resources that are out there. I look forward to next week's video. Until then, God bless.